we see the Human Torch Johnny Storm being chased along the bright streets of New York. The advanced robot looks intent on catching up with Johnny. Supporting him are his colleagues, Reed Richards, his sister Susan Storm, and Ben Grimm. Reed tells him not to attack the robot and wait for them to get to where he is. Of course, Johnny follows Reed's advice, so he lets his car hit and destroys the robot. Another one appears, which shoots a laser beam at him. He hits it with his fire in retaliation. Reed, Susan, and Ben get to where he is. The latter gloats about his latest adventure when suddenly his body starts to vaporize until he's completely gone. The three are shocked about what they have just witnessed. Using a device, Reed detects traces of wormhole particles. He concludes that somehow, Johnny may have been sucked into another dimension. Susan passes out after hearing this. Reed brings her back to their headquarters, then tells Ben to go to the charity event they are all supposed to attend that night. Meanwhile, Johnny is in an unfamiliar place. He has a collar put on his neck. Light glitches and the next thing he sees is a large dome above his head. It reveals a huge coliseum filled with human-like entities with blue skin. He is standing right in the middle as if he's a gladiator waiting for his fight. Someone calls his full name. He thinks it's his sister playing a prank on him, but it's not. It is Ronan the accuser sitting on top of a high podium. He declares Johnny to have committed high crimes against the Cree Empire. Johnny doesn't take this seriously and calls everyone blue smurfs. He flies off towards the dome, but it is impenetrable. Also, it turns out the collar on his neck dissipates his flames. He falls to the ground while the audience laughs at his failure. Indeed, for him, Ronan is the angry smurf. In the laboratory, Susan is already awake. She watches Reed enter codes in his advanced, high-tech supercomputer to trace the energy he detected earlier. After a few moments, the AI confirms Johnny's location, and it's where they least expect him to be. The location shows a point somewhere in Central Park. And indeed, the Great Dome of Cree suddenly materializes out of thin air in the middle of the park. Ronan tells Johnny that according to the Cree law, the accused has the right to be terminated on their home planet. From a different perspective, that is merciful of them, but only if the accusations are justified. What has Johnny done to earn the great trial by Ronan and the Cree citizens? Ronan tells him he can have his lawyer and witnesses to defend his case. Naturally, he calls for Reed to be his lawyer and Susan and Ben as his witnesses. It so happens that Reed and Susan are already outside the dome, trying to destroy the energy barrier. They are summoned inside. On the other hand, Ben gets summoned while he's entertaining the kids at the charity event. As the defense, Reed requests to know the specific charges thrown against his client. In response, the accuser shows several footages of Johnny destroying robots. The accused acknowledges the actions and says several reasons for doing such, but none of them were exactly justified. Reed makes a good point by saying that the reason for the Sentry's appearance on Earth could be subjected to misinterpretation. He adds that Johnny deeply regrets his actions and would like to offer an apology. But Ronan is not letting go that easily. He emphasizes that attacking the robots is equal to attacking the Cree Empire itself. Therefore, Johnny must be judged. Susan chimes in and says that her brother would not do anything irresponsible like the accusations. But Ronan shows footage of her reprimanding her brother for his careless attitude. Ben tries to save the defense by pointing out Johnny's good qualities. Yet Ronan is one step ahead of them by showing another footage of Johnny pranking him. It's kind of creepy seeing that an alien empire has footage of humans doing normal activities. But the point is that the witnesses' statements are made invalid by the videos. Therefore, Ronan the accuser proceeds to pass down his verdict. Johnny Storms must be executed right there and then. He releases big metal balls into the field, which turn out to be robotic animals that are meant to carry out the execution. Susan, Reed, and Ben stand by their colleague as the creatures surround them. Seeing the solidarity among the Fantastic Four, Ronan declares that all of them will share the same fate. He declares them enemies of the Cree Empire, and he will carry out their sentences. The crowd cheers for their accuser, and so the robots attack them. Reed and Ben hold off the creatures, while Susan protects her brother using her force field. Ronan gets so involved in his role that he does not care what happens to the surroundings. When a robotic creature is thrown at him, he slaps it aside, not seeing that it goes straight to the audience. It so happens to land right next to a kid. With the rest of the group busy defending themselves, Johnny is the only one who sees the danger. Despite getting limited by his collar, he still flies toward the kid and makes himself the bait for the creature. Thankfully, the robot gets burned by his fire, and his actions are witnessed by the audience. Ronan is intent on punishing the Fantastic Four, but he hears the audience cheering for Johnny this time. Humiliated, he gets angry at the audience for changing their favorite. Just in time, a massive floating head appears in the middle of the Coliseum. This is the Supreme Intelligence, and he makes his appearance to give the final judgment. He recognizes that the Cree people have spoken. He has also seen that Johnny has rescued a Cree child. Therefore, the humans must be cleared of all charges. For now, Ronan tries to justify his sentencing by saying the humans have defied and mocked him. but the Supreme Intelligence won't listen. He abides by his rule, adding that the Fantastic Four may be helpful against the Skrulls. Ronan gets banished, while the four of them return to Earth. In the aftermath of the events, Johnny apologizes to his teammates for causing worry and inconvenience. But this is Johnny Storm we're talking about, so his apologies only lasted for about 5 seconds before going back to his jokester self. Days later, Reed is studying several formulas projected in his laboratory. He is figuring out the existence of what he calls the microverse. Ben, who is with him, isn't that fond of discussing intellectual matters, but he reminds Reed about his promise of creating another test that may return him to a standard but a handsome human being. Reed promises the normal part, but not the handsome part. Ben leaves his friend to take a shower. Reed continues to study his formulas. He is not aware of the tiny robotic bug that is flying toward him. As soon as it lands on the back of his neck, it injects a green liquid into his body. Reed starts to feel a different sensation in his body as if he's getting transported somewhere. After a few seconds, Reed opens his eyes. He is horrified to realize that his consciousness has been transferred to another body. And out of all entities to exchange minds with, he exchanged with Dr. Doom himself. This means that his rival is now taking over his body. To make matters worse, he is sitting on a throne imprisoned by green energy barriers. Reed, now controlling Doom's body, tries to punch his way out of the prison, but he is powerless against it. Then Reed Richards makes contact with him, except that he is controlled by Doom. Doom mocks him for his helplessness. He declares that while he's in Reed's body, he will destroy everything, just like how Reed had destroyed his face. Doom cuts off communication. He uploads something onto the computer. Whatever it is, it will definitely not be something good. Doom, controlling Reed's body, proceeds to walk around the Fantastic Four headquarters to make preparations for his sinister plans. One by one he meets the members. Part of his plan is to destroy the group from within by breaking their bond. So that's what he does. To Ben, he tells that he has stopped working on the test and that he's better off staying as ugly as he is now. To Johnny, he insults him by saying that he is so out of control that villains are not needed anymore. To Sue, Doom is not sure what to do. Instead, he simply cancels all his lectures, thinking it will offend her. But it does the opposite, as Sue gets suspicious about his behavior. Back in the prison, Reed recites some hex codes. It works, as it releases the metal mask from his face. Studying it, he realizes it's made of adamantium. Perhaps it can break the energy barrier. He strikes it with the mask. After a few moments, the barrier is down, and he is free. He then goes to find the exit, where he meets Doom's robot minions. At first, he's afraid about what they may do to him, but he remembers he is Doom at the moment. He orders them to self-destruct. After dealing with them, he eventually finds the exit to this prison tower. He takes a taxi to go towards their headquarters. Meanwhile, Sue, Johnny, and Ben gather and discuss Reed's recent behavior. Johnny and Ben think Reed is simply being a jerk and are still taking offense at the insults. But when Sue tells them about the cancelled lectures, they think otherwise. Just then, the intruder alarm goes off. They find Doom trying to gain entry through their main door using their passwords. Kind of polite for an archenemy to do. Still, when the imposter Reed shows up, they capture Doom and put him inside one of their holding cells. Imposter Reed brings Doom to the lower basement, where he updates him on the progress of his plan. He has shut down the safety protocols of the building and programmed the power core to overload. If this continues, the tower will explode and will incinerate most of the city. Fortunately, this plan gets heard by the other three who followed him in the basement. Imposter Reed tries to blame Doom, but Sue decides to stick with the green guy. She frees Doom, while Johnny and Ben hold off Imposter Reed. Sue accompanies Doom inside Reed's laboratory. There, the formulas for the microverse are still projected. Suddenly, he sees a new pattern that helps confirm his theories, but he focuses on the immediate problem first. He recreates the serum that was used to exchange their consciousness. Then, he goes back to the basement and injects this into Reed's body. This works, as finally, Reed is back in his own body and Doom in his own. But the danger is not over, as the power core is about to overload. Thankfully, Reed has a working plan. He asks Sue to activate a small box. This causes the overload to stop and turn the power levels back to normal. Reed explains that because Doom rearranged his lab, he found a way to convert energy into a microscopic level. That's what he did to the power core. Embarrassed and defeated, Doom vows to take revenge on Reed, before bursting out of the basement. Later on, Reed asks Sue how she decided to trust him despite being in Doom's body. It's thanks to her intuition that he prevented a possible catastrophe from happening. Sue tells him that the imposter cancelled all his lectures, which is something the true Reed Richards won't do. He is aghast. Now that's a catastrophe indeed. Days after Doom's takeover of Reed's body, the latter has created an interdimensional viewer that can tap into spaces that are not yet reachable for most of humankind. But since it's still in its inception, it is sensitive to slight movements. That's why when Ben and Johnny had a little skirmish near the device, it opened a portal that led in a giant centipede-like insect. Now, the two are running around the city, trying to capture the rampaging creature. Reed and Sue arrive, bringing with them the gauntlet that is paired with the device. Using the gauntlet, Reed creates extra-dimensional energy to whip the creature back into the portal. When this is done, the crowd cheers them up for saving the day. Reporters and paparazzi are also rushing toward the Fantastic Four, but with a different agenda. They claim that Reed Richards intentionally experimented on them before, causing them to gain the powers they have now. They are all speechless upon hearing this. Reed tries to deny the allegations, but the evidence is all over everywhere. When the four get back to their headquarters, they question Reed for clarification. He admits to writing and publishing a paper about cosmic rays, but nothing about experimenting with them on friends. In fact, after the incident, he created a shield to protect humans from the dangerous effects of such rays. But Ben and Johnny are too hurt and affected by the reports. Sue calms them down, but to no avail. The two guys leave to clear their minds. Reed encourages Sue to follow them. He wants to deal with this alone in the meantime. Johnny flies off above the city, followed by his sister. He makes a good point when he says that he, at least, gets benefits from the powers he has gotten because of the incident. But if it's true that Reed really experimented on them, then can they trust him again in the future? Meanwhile, Ben goes to Alicia to seek advice. Alicia points out that Reed has been carrying the guilt about what happened to the four of them, especially to him. She reminds him to remember that when there's a rumor trying to destroy their friendship, taking advantage of the internal dispute among the Fantastic Four, the familiar robotic minions of Dr. Doom attacks each one of them, overpowering them. They are captured and imprisoned individually in cages. It is Sue who first wakes up and communicates with others. She realizes only Reed is not captured, so there must be someone causing discord to attack Reed alone. She shares this hunch with Johnny and Ben. All of them decide to get out of their cages, but the one behind this chaos seems to be one step ahead of them. They realize each cage they are in specializes in neutralizing their powers. For example, every time Johnny uses his fire, the cage gets filled with water. In Ben's case, the floor and the walls get filled with acid, making his rock arms unusable. Sue's cage is installed with sonic devices, making her nearly unconscious. After failing to escape, they all realize they need Reed. Speaking of Reed, he has only found out that the paper given to the journalists is highly edited to discredit him. While he's figuring out who did it, a robot attacks his lab. Reed realizes the perpetrator is none other than Doom. He has probably done the editing when he took over Reed's body days ago. Doom ties him with manacles that cause electric shock when Reed tries to use his power. He sees the interdimensional gauntlet and marvels that Reed can even produce such a piece of equipment. He tells his captive that he discovered the negative zone years ago. He believes it is the common point among all universes currently known. Perhaps it's the starting point for everything. Doom uses the gauntlet to open a portal and uses its power to create a rift among the inner dimensions. If this imbalance doesn't get stable right away, it will cause an explosion that will blow the majority of New York City. Reed tries to reason with Doom, saying that thousands of lives will get lost. However, his pleas fall on deaf ears. Doom will do everything just to defame Reed, even if it means opening up a portal to erase a city off the map. Tied on the ground, Reed is helpless as he watches Doom create the Doomsday. Back in the cages, Sue figures out how they can escape from their situation. If the cages are made to neutralize specific powers, then maybe they are not meant to handle a different ability. Johnny gets the idea, so he concentrates on melting the glass in Ben's cage, and he successfully does it. A robot watcher comes closer to stop them from escaping, but Ben is faster in dismantling it. Next, Ben gets out of his cage to dismantle the other robots and free Johnny and Sue. They fly towards Reed's laboratory up in Baxter Building, just in time to save him. But they're too late in stopping the portal from gaining power. The rift from the inner dimensions causes the portal to shoot beams, crystallizing their targets. Large insects are also transported, terrorizing the citizens below. They capture Doom and bind him with one of their robotic arms. Then they fly outside to assess the situation. Reed has already closed the portal, but too much energy from the negative zone has seeped out and affected the citizens. He goes on to enumerate what they must do. Sue cuts him to say the bottom line, save the world. And that's what they do. Johnny and Ben deal with the creatures below, while Sue goes after Doom, who has gotten out of his binds and is running away. Reed wears the gauntlet. He stretches his hand up to the sky to harness the collected energy and stabilize it. In the end, he gets successful. All insects are sucked back into their dimensions, while the crystallized targets return to normal. Public damage is contained and the Fantastic Four are all heroes again. When reporters run to them to get the scoop, they clear Reed's name and declare Doom to be the one behind everything. Ben apologizes to Reed for doubting him. Reed, in turn, expresses his guilt about his failures. In the end, they all kiss and make up. But perhaps Reed should label any dangerous portal-making device in the future, yes. Due to their busy work, the Fantastic Four rarely get together to enjoy each other's company. But when they do, they go for a barbecue, and Ben is in charge. However, Reed has an unexpected guest. Johnny suggests they eavesdrop on what they are talking about. Before they can do anything, the floors above get smashed. Then the Incredible Hulk appears in front of them, with Reed unconscious on the smashed floor. Ben subdues the Hulk, but they are equal in strength. Sue and Johnny help as well. yet the Hulk is much stronger than all of them combined. In no time, the fight transfers to the streets, affecting innocent citizens. Hulk mocks Ben and declares he's stronger. Forgetting that he's supposed to subdue the rampaging giant, Ben falls for the mocking and goes all out. The two grab and smash whatever they can find, turning the New York streets into a battlefield. Fortunately, Reed wakes up. He sneaks up behind the Hulk and forces a headset on it. It makes him unconscious, which allows him to return to being a human. Johnny is surprised to realize that the Hulk is Reed's unexpected guest. Reed introduces his friend, Bruce Banner, aka the Incredible Hulk. He has always known about Bruce's situation since the incident with the gamma rays. That's why he has also searched for ways to turn him back into a regular human just like Ben. Sue is not exactly happy about what has happened. For her, Reed could have informed them about his relationship with the Hulk, and then maybe they could have prevented half of the city from getting destroyed. Disappointed, she walks away. When Bruce wakes up, Ben immediately tells him to go green and square off with him. Reed enters the room and apologizes for not making a cure in time, while Johnny calls them both nerds. Bruce says he understands. He tells them that his transformation is triggered by his anger. He realizes that he shouldn't let his frustrations get the best of him. Upon hearing this, Ben and Johnny get more careful speaking around Bruce. Ben even soothes him, saying that the cure takes time, and the monsters must stick together while waiting. Bruce contradicts the term. For him, Ben Grimm is a hero. On the other hand, Hulk is a force of nature, the real monster. As if remembering something, he gets up and says that he must leave. Many people are after him, and this may cause danger to people around. Right on cue, the building's alarm goes off. There are securities set in place for such events, but this time the intruders are using highly advanced weapons to override the measures. Reed tells Ben to take care of Bruce, while he and Johnny will hold off the trespassers. At first, they outsmart these men in black, but their leader, Agent Pratt, starts using gadgets that can neutralize their abilities. In no time, they capture both Reed and Johnny. Meanwhile, Ben tells Bruce to hide inside Johnny's car and Hulk at it all he wants. But this doesn't work, as they both get captured, too. Agent Pratt oversees the 4 mutants getting put inside large black containers. He is proud to have captured not only the Hulk but the Fantastic Four as well. His organization, the home base, will have 5 superhuman weapons at their command. However, one of his men informs him that they still haven't found the Invisible Woman. Well, that's common sense since her powers can literally make her invisible. Sue uses this to her advantage and uses the element of surprise to get near the containers. With her clever approach and sneaking techniques, Sue is able to free Reed, Johnny, and Ben. But the container with Bruce in it is already attached to a helicopter that is ready to take off. At once, the Fantastic Four fights back at the intruders. The enemies are totally powerless against them. Reed prevents the helicopter from taking off. Agent Pratt shoots an immobilizing beam at him. Reed lets go of the helicopter. With that, the enemies successfully take away Bruce Banner. A few hours later, the 4 are riding their Fantastic car. Reed is tracing Bruce's signal, saying that his extreme levels of gamma rays are like a flare gun. They eventually track him to the enemy base. They are immediately greeted by jets that shoot homing missiles at them. The Fantastic car divides into 4 smaller cars, and each one deals with the jets. Bruce is getting unloaded on the base's platform. The enemies release more weapons to counter the 4 heroes. They even bring out 2 large, advanced tanks and get them ready to shoot. Reed comes down to free Bruce from the container. Yet again, he is brought down by Agent Pratt. Sue and Johnny are still dealing with the jets and other soldiers. This leaves Ben to protect him. Right now, Ben has no other choice but to call out the green monster. He insults Bruce, even calling his mother names. Apparently, personal insults don't work. Ben changes tactics and gaslights Bruce into thinking that if he gets caught, he'll become a monster weapon that will destroy humanity. This time, it works. He changes into the Hulk. However, instead of charging toward the enemies, the Hulk charges toward Ben because he remembers him calling his mama ugly. If this is how it works, then so be it. Ben runs around the enemies in their tanks with the Hulk chasing him madly. This tactic destroys all weapons of the enemies. Agent Pratt tries to subdue him, but fails. The Hulk recognizes him. He shouts at him to leave him alone. Fearing for his life, Pratt agrees. In the end, Hulk is let go into the wilderness. On the other hand, Pratt and his subordinates get apprehended by the military. The Fantastic Four come home from their regular trip outside the Earth. For ordinary people, this activity is a once-in-a-lifetime event. But for Reed, Sue, Johnny, and Ben, this is a common task that sometimes they get bored with it. An occasional bump or aftershock is the most exciting thing that can happen, just like what they experience now. When their Fantastic car arrives on the Baxter Building's helipad, Reed promises to check the engines and systems to avoid those aftershocks again. They are all standing on the platform when, without warning, it falls to the ground. Thanks to Sue's control of the force field, she's able to stop the massive platform from crushing them. This is unexpected since it's the first time they witness one of Reed's inventions malfunction. What's more bizarre is the sudden appearance of Courtney, their neighbor from below. Normally she appears on their doorstep to complain or to sue them for alien invasion. but this time she welcomes them with a basket of goodies and wants to have a friendly talk. Puzzled, the four heroes decline the offer and go inside their homes. What they don't know is that Courtney has them trapped in her plans. To check the cause of the platform's fall, Reed asks his AI named Herbie to run a system diagnostic. To his surprise, the AI is speaking in Spanish. Reed can understand the foreign language, but he doesn't understand why his AI is suddenly speaking this way and not even making any sense. He is sure that he has multiple backups in case of system failure. However, this is something he hasn't encountered before. In their kitchen, Sue is setting up the goodie basket, while Ben is taking food from the fridge. When he bites into his burger, he is puzzled to know it tastes like chicken. Not only that, the apple and even the lime soda taste like chicken, too. Sue is also experiencing some abnormalities in the tap water and phone. Annoyed, she decides to take a shower first. Johnny has not had anything to complain about yet. When he hears the doorbell, he opens the door to find the mailman. Willie enthusiastically gives him one bag of letters. Then he asks Johnny about his sister Sue and her powers. To continue this unexpected stream of visitors and malfunctions, Ben gets a clobbering session from Herbie. He always asks the AI to prepare some gym equipment so he can exercise, but the AI only responds in Spanish, then uses the pieces of machinery to toss Ben everywhere. After this, the machines get dismantled. Then out of nowhere, his girlfriend Alicia appears. She presents him with some odd artwork and asks about his friend Reed. Speaking of Reed, he's now talking to Herbie in Spanish, still trying to figure out what has gone wrong. Mrs. Monet appears in front of him, holding her cat. She tells him that Ben is the one who let her in. She also says that she's fascinated by his powers, and she wants to know his strength and density. This time, Reed gets suspicious, aside from the fact that strangers are suddenly getting access to their home. It's not every day that Reed hears an old woman wanting to know about the characteristics of a human rock, so he gathers his colleagues and has a conversation with Mrs. Monet in the living room. He prompts the conversation with weird and unrealistic statements, like meeting her 100 years ago and reminiscing about taking a bath on the moon. The conversation ends with Reed convincing the old woman to show her wings, which she does. Meanwhile, the aliens watching this believe the humans still don't suspect anything from their weird behaviors. They say goodbye to Mrs. Monet. Then, without speaking, Reed asks them to follow him into his laboratory. There, he envelops them in his rubber body and reveals his suspicions that somehow their neighbors have been replaced by shape-shifting aliens. Reed suggests that they separate to tackle the issue. Sue and Ben will act normal and talk with the aliens posing as humans. They need to make sure that none of their friends are harmed in this operation. Reed and Johnny will check the wirings of the laboratory to see any damages. Everyone agrees and goes on to their assignments. Sue and Ben visit Courtney in her apartment. The old woman is pleasantly surprised to see Sue visiting her. She lets them in. Ben goes to the fridge to look for something to eat. Courtney's butler comes behind him to offer something, but Ben drops the pretense and grabs the butler. Courtney hears the commotion and gets worried. She thinks it's time to stop pretending. She brings out a small alien gun and probes Sue with it. The butler also brings out his own, though he puts it inside Ben's mouth to get some samples of saliva. Then they both transform into their true forms. Meanwhile, as Reed checks the wirings of his lab, Johnny gets snuck on by Willie the mailman. The latter probes Johnny with the same alien device and then disappears. Reed tries to help, but he realizes something is wrong with the wires surrounding them. Reed calls back Sue and Ben. Both are in the middle of a fight with the aliens. Sue reports that they call themselves Skrulls. Reed tells her to come back to their laboratory. Once they are complete again, Reed asks Sue to use her powers to remove the sky. It sounds crazy, but when she does it, the sky reveals the large interior of another ship. Reed finally explains what is going on. Instead of their initial suspicion that aliens have taken over the building, the truth is far from it. They are all abducted by the Skrulls on their ship. The bump they felt earlier is actually them entering the aliens' ship instead of Earth's atmosphere. The Skrulls show themselves, copying the appearance of the four heroes. They try to confuse them because their main goal is to get the last DNA samples from Reed. Eventually, they get what they want. The Skrulls evacuate and make the area explode to terminate the Fantastic Four. But the heroes are not that easy to finish. Sue covers them all within her force field, while Reed summons their Fantasticar. They get on safely. As they are about to pursue their kidnappers, they find the Skrulls' ship speeding away. With no choice, they all go back to Earth, thankful that nothing more than their DNA samples has been taken. Once they are back, Sue has to make sure they are really on Earth. She visits their neighbor Courtney, and as usual, she threatens her with lawsuits and tells them to go away. Yep, that's the right attitude. They are indeed safely back home. Even though he's considered a superhero, Reed Richards doesn't stop in his goals of discovering scientific marvels. As of now, his focus is exploring the microverse. He believes that there is a whole universe existing between atoms. Ben is helping him monitor the mini Fantasticar that they are experimenting on. Reed tells his colleague that he has invited a good friend of his that has been studying the microverse all his life. Providing an icebreaker in their activity is Johnny, bringing with him a dog he borrowed from a kid downstairs. He calls the dog Firehound. The dog jumps on Reed, causing him to drop the device he uses to maintain the mini-ship's balance. Because of this, the ship suddenly flies around the room. Johnny commands Firehound to chase after the ship. What happens is utter chaos. The dog breaks one piece of equipment after another in pursuit of the flying mini-ship. At one point, it splashes some sort of green liquid on itself and breaks a canister that produces purple gas. Then it jumps on Reed, Ben, and Johnny before getting captured by Sue using her force field. She chides the boys for being loud and unorganized and pats Firehound for being a good boy. Exhausted by this unnecessary mess, the four of them call it a day. What happens next will never be a small surprise to them. When they wake up, they find themselves shrunk to a smaller size. Reed theorizes that they must have been affected by the shrinking ingredient from the broken equipment yesterday. Johnny finds the situation amusing, especially since he can ride Firehound like a horse. Ben also thinks this is an advantage, as he can eat double the size of any sandwich without spending too much. Although, it should be a concern for them that when Johnny is not riding Firehound, the dog is either walking up the walls or floating. Regardless, Reed is happy to know this development in his experiments. Later on, they are not so happy anymore as they keep on shrinking to a kid's size. Reed calls on Herbie to help them, but the AI system doesn't recognize his new high-pitched voice. They all decide to go back to the lab, even as they keep on shrinking to a size similar to action figures. Herbie sees them entering the lab, but doesn't recognize them. The AI categorizes the Fantastic Four into unknown creatures, so he initiates an infestation protocol that exterminates vermin. The AI attacks all of them using arm-like extensions from the walls. Herbie sees them as rats and must be terminated immediately. When Ben's girlfriend, Alicia, visits the laboratory, the AI doesn't stop its purging. It tries to convince the guests that there are no rats in the building. Also, it seems to be confused about its human masters. Reed hears Alicia's voice and thinks maybe she can help them with their predicament. However, due to the AI's confusing remarks, Alicia decides to leave. The four tiny heroes have no choice but to battle their own AI system. After a few minutes of dodging, they are cornered into a ventilation system. Reed is calculating how much time they have left before getting shrunk into non-existence. He thinks that perhaps if they reach a certain size, they can enter the microverse and reverse the continuing size problem. But Sue has to remind him that before it happens, they may get sliced by the giant exhaust fan. One by one they get sucked toward it. Thankfully, ants come to their rescue. The other three are mystified by this. However, Reed knows that his friend has arrived. Hank Pym controls the bugs into destroying manual controls. Even though he's also as small as the ants, it's clear that the Fantastic Four is smaller, indicating that they don't have long enough before disappearing completely from their reality. Hank offers to help them since he's capable of growing back to normal size. He tells them to ride the bugs and they all go to the lab. However, Herbie sees the ants and initiates insect protocol to eliminate them. Fortunately, Firehound appears out of thin air and breathes fire into the camera. Herbie's attack on them stops. When they get to the lab door, Johnny has to use his fire powers to show Hank the passcode. The four are shrinking at an alarming rate. Hank can't see or feel them anymore. He simply has to trust that they have shrunk between the ridges of his fingerprints, so he must shake them out into the destroyed microverse equipment. As they fly aimlessly into nothingness, Reed sees a blue light passing by. He recognizes it as an electron. He asks them to help him rearrange the atoms to reverse their situation. And just as they quickly shrank, they grow back to their normal size. Reed explains that he simply grabbed an electron from the microverse and changed its trajectory to polarize it. Hank is amazed by this feat, but the other three are simply done hearing nerdy science facts. Reed thanks Hank again for helping them. Just then, a kid exits the elevator. He is the actual owner of Firehound, whose name is Rufus. The kid is happy that the Fantastic Four agreed to babysit his pet. What he doesn't know is that his dog starts floating again. The elevator door closes as the kid screams in shock.